Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, coming to you for the first time in front of my One Piece wall, because today we are going to be ranking the Straw Hat Pirate crew. So since December of last year, I have been rereading One Piece. My first time going back to the very beginning and rereading the series. Previously, I had read up through the whole Cake Island arc. I took a little bit of a break and started up rereading it. I've gotten through everything that's been released stateside at this point, so 103 volumes of One Piece. And now that I've finally caught up, I'm going to start putting out content for One Piece. I realize that this is going to be a drop in an endless ocean of One Piece content that exists on YouTube. I'm sure I'm not going to say anything that other content creators haven't already mentioned, but One Piece is my favorite series, full stop. And so I want to start putting out some content discussing my thoughts on the characters, my thoughts on the writing, the world building, and what better way to start than just focusing in on the crew, giving you my rankings so that you know going into my other videos where some of my biases lie and what characters I like to see focused on. That being said, all the One Piece crew are really fun and amusing characters. I like certain aspects of every single one of them. So even though I'm ranking them from 10 to 1, know that even my number 10 is still a character that I really enjoy reading and is still a fun character. I think Oda does an excellent job in bringing out aspects of every single character that are significant and fun and interesting, and blending together a number of different tropes to make for this hodgepodge of a crew, and the way that they work together really work for the overall story. Also keep in mind that this is a subjective list. Perception is reality. If you feel like my number 10 is your number 1, then that's your favorite, and that's completely valid. This is just my feelings on the characters and where I would put them in a ranking. Starting out at number 10, we have Brook, the musician for the crew. So Brook suffers from a couple of different issues. The first of which, and this will be something that is true for most of these low-ranking characters, is that he hasn't had as much time as others to develop. He is the second to last crew member added chronologically at this point. And so because he hasn't had as much time to develop, because he wasn't there in the early parts of the story, there's less to attach to. Beyond that, Brook suffers from kind of being repetitive in a couple of different aspects. His primary method of fighting is with his sword cane, and we already have Zoro, who is out to be the strongest swordsman in the world. So his fighting style is already covered by another character. And then his personality, the things that he does are these really corny jokes and asking women to show him their panties. And that's one, very awkward. We already have that kind of characterization with Sanji. So both in his combat role and in his comedic role, those things have already been covered elsewhere. I will say that there were a number of interesting things done with the character in the Whole Cake Island arc in particular, because of his soul magic and the fact that Big Mom had these powers that affected souls and put them into other things. So I like that Oda was able to bring that concept up and was able to work that into the story. His backstory is also very interesting and very sad, like most of the crew members. I do want to see him reunited with Laboon, but again, the negative qualities for me kind of outweigh those positive qualities. Number 9 is going to be Franky for a lot of similar reasons. He's been on the crew he's like the third most recent crew member to be added, and Franky's just weird. I like the mecha designs and like his combining robots and things. It's very fun. I'm a fan of Super Sentai, so anytime we see his creations, we see his mecha, those are very cool. But Franky himself is another one of these kind of awkward characters. His big thing is like being mostly robotic and how he can tank a lot of damage, and it is utilized well in a number of arcs where he is kind of the protector of other characters. He soaks up a lot of damage. So I think more than Brook, he adds something new to the dynamics of like the combat scenes and the fighting scenes, but his personality is just something that doesn't gel with me. There's not a lot with his backstory that extends beyond Water 7 and Enos Lobby, and so I don't feel very attached to the character. Number 8 is going to be Usopp, and this is the first one that I feel like it's a real shame that this character fell so far down the rankings. I really want to like Usopp. Him, Nami, and Chopper are kind of the trio of just average characters who find themselves in this crew of super competent, super powered fighters. Early on in Alabasta, in Water 7 and Enos Lobby, we were developing the character to be someone who would go from being this coward and this liar into someone who the crew could rely on, who could be competent, who could grow and change. And then the time skip happened. And I think the time skip did a really bad disservice to Usopp for a couple of different reasons. The first is that Usopp's 2-year training time skip arc is all plant-based, and it like that motif is not something that was brought up earlier. It doesn't build into something already established about the character. And then beyond that, he spends 2 years on an island where everything, all the plants and animals and things are trying to kill him, and they get stronger and stronger as you get further into the island, and he comes back and he's still this coward. He's still running from fights, and it's even worse after the time skip, because in Alabasta, in Enos Lobby, Usopp comes in, and even though he's frightened, even though he's terrified, he still stands up. He fights against some of these heavy hitters. In Dressrosa, he is explicitly shown to be abandoning an entire group of people who are like idolizing him and wanting him to save them. I feel like he's going backwards in this character development that I was hoping we were setting up for early on in the story. It's really unfortunate because I was hoping he would develop into this warrior of the sea, and that is kind of his whole his aspiration, but he's not moving toward that aspiration since the time skip happened. He seems to be moving the opposite direction. Unfortunate that he slipped so far in my rankings. At number 7, I put Jinbe. Jinbe is another one that we don't know much about him. Like personally, we've had a flashback of him. We've had like a backstory. Once he joins the crew, there's an immediate recognition of like why having a strong helmsman is an important aspect of the crew. I do like that Oda works in showing like what assets they bring in Wano, where he and Robin are kind of like the adults in the room. It used to be like Franky and Robin, but he and Robin are talking about like, you know, keeping the kids safe. And I thought that was really funny. Because he's joined so late, I feel like there's less development for him. We haven't gotten really big emotional moments from him, but just what I've seen of his personality and what I've seen of his character, something that I like. And I think that probably older readers of the manga probably gravitate toward Jinbe because he has that kind of mature quality to him, and he recognizes that Luffy is kind of brash and bombastic, and he's willing to go along with it, but also tries to advise him and tries to temper a little bit of the craziness that's going on with the crew. Number 6, I put Luffy. I feel like Luffy is the like prototypical shonen hero, which is not a bad thing. But I feel like because he's the main character, he does kind of fall into this like everyman kind of thing. He's very simple with his motivations, and someone that you can kind of grab onto and follow and identify with, kind of generic in a way. He's certainly my favorite shonen hero, and I feel like he definitely does push against some of the archetypes of earlier shonen heroes. Ultimately, he falls in the middle of the road for me. At number 5, I put Chopper. I think this shifted in the most recent arc in Wano because Oda worked in Chopper's expertise with medicine into the story. His selflessness and his ability was what led to several people defecting to his side, at least for the moment, in him trying to save some people who became infected with a virus, essentially. Monster Point was a very interesting concept early on, back in, again, like Water 7, Enos Lobby. I think now that he can just turn into that form for a certain amount of time, I feel like that kind of weakened it because I liked the lack of control. And I realized that it's trying to develop the character a little more, but I do feel like it kind of took away a little bit of the danger and the personality, the unique quality that he had, and that it's just now another form that he can turn into. Similarly, after the time skip, I know he has several other points that he can go into, but I feel like it's underutilized, and they're not very distinct. So I know he, immediately after the time skip, several of them were highlighted, and since then I don't feel like he's really been given enough time to really display his prowess or his powers. He's also, again, part of this trio of just normal-ish people that are trying to survive in this crazy world. He often like runs away with Usopp, and he wants to avoid fighting generally. And while that can be an endearing quality when your primary story is about pirates fighting the Navy and other people, it can be kind of disappointing when the fighting starts happening and this character just kind of like disappears or runs away or tries to get out of it. So that's why Chopper is at number 5. Number 4 is Sanji, and I was real surprised when putting this list together that he had fallen so far. Sanji used to be my number 1 character, but the time skip really did a disservice to Sanji's character. The whole idea that the reason why he figured out how to do airwalking is because he wanted to get away from transvestites that were on the island that he got sent to, which was a choice, was really weird. I did not like anything about his time skip story. I didn't find it funny. And having reread this, being a little bit older, some of the qualities of Sanji are a lot more cringy than they were when I was back in college reading this for the first time. Especially Fishman Island, I think, is a standout example of just really terrible writing. the idea that he was going to die because he couldn't look at these mermaids and his nosebleed would be so terrible that he would literally die was not funny and like not interesting. I do feel like the backstory in Whole Cake Island helps a bit. I think he's the only character that I can think of that's had basically two origin stories detailed throughout the course of the manga. And so it was interesting seeing his like upbringing before he met Zeph and before he became a chef on the Baratier, and learning about the Vinsmoke family and kind of what he was supposed to be and how his selflessness and his kindness is his strength was all very interesting. I also, again, like that Oda worked in a Super Sentai team essentially into the story. And I like that at one point Sanji considers like, do I need to use this power or should I be my own person? And he chooses to deny using the suit, deny that power, deny his family name. And so all of that's very strong. His backstory is very strong. I like his fighting style. I like the idea that he only uses kicks. I think that's a clever idea. And I like his interaction with Zoro. Their constant bickering and fighting is fun. But there's just certain aspects of the character that no longer play the same way they used to. And I feel like the time skip was a horrible, did horrible things for the character. And then immediately afterwards, you had the events in Fishman Island that just further brought this character down for me. So on that note, I will say that I feel like the live action is doing a very good job of toning down some of that sexism that Sanji has, where he is just trying to, he is trying to woo the ladies, but it's not as overt. I don't think the way that season 1 went, that we would get to the point that we're at now with some of these complaints that I have with Sanji. And so maybe live action Sanji will be higher on my list if I ever rank the live action characters. Number 3 for me is going to be Nami, which again, I was kind of surprised putting this list together that Nami rated so high. Nami has probably one of my favorite moments of One Piece in the Arlong Park arc, where she asks Luffy for help. It's a very iconic scene, and one that even after all these chapters I've read sticks with me and is a standout moment of the manga and the show and the live action. I feel like early on, Nami is the ship mom, and I like that aspect of her. I like how she's like, you need to eat. I think early on there's a thing about you have to eat citrus or you'll get scurvy, and like she's the only one who seems to know anything about seafaring when the crew first gets together. I really like her backstory, her relationship with her found family, and her taking on these responsibilities in secret was really moving. She's a character who's definitely changed and grown over the course of the manga, whereas I feel like some of the other characters stay fairly static. At the beginning, she does not trust the crew, she doesn't believe in friendship, she doesn't, and she has good reasons why, but at this point, she's very much like a team player and is trying to keep the crew together and really trusts in her friends. I also feel like Nami is what Usopp should have been, or at least what Usopp was promised to be early on in the story. So she's had a consistent through line with her motif of being the navigator, having a climate baton, so having weather be part of her fighting style and her overall aesthetic, her gradually growing with that theme over the course of the manga. So like her 2-year time skip was in Weatheria, and she learns more about weather and gets even more information and more control over the elements. Her climate baton starts off as like a cheap kid's toy and has now become something where she can manipulate the air, create clouds, create rain, create illusions. And it's her cleverness, it's her intelligence that allows her to come up with these interesting ideas and these new concepts for the very basic things that the climate baton is able to do. In Whole Cake Island, she got Zeus, one of Big Mom's homies, who is a rain cloud. And again, it's like a power up that still thematically works with what she has been designed to do from the start. And at this point, you know, she can shoot lightning, she can create rain, she can do all these different things, and she is definitely not a frontline fighter, but she has multiple times been a very vital support character, a support fighter for a particular encounter. I feel like Nami is still, again, one of these characters that is a normal person and so doesn't run toward the fights, but if something is happening, she is willing to put herself out and try something. She tried, even in the most recent arc in Wano, to fight against Ulti, and you can argue that Ulti was weakened by the encounter with Big Mom, but the fact is, like, Nami was still willing to take that step and to try to use her abilities to fight against a very strong combatant. Number 2 for me is going to be Zoro, another one that really surprised me. On my first read of One Piece back in college, I felt Zoro was very much your typical shonen dragon character. You know, his whole goal is just to be the greatest swordsman. All of his fights are just like getting cooler at sword fighting and being a better combatant. And that's very linear. That's a very simplified idea of like character growth and power upgrades. But upon reread, and I know this is something that some people don't like, but I really enjoy watching Zoro go from this character who's like, I'm absolutely not going to follow you, I am a pirate hunter, to being like the number one person who backs up Luffy regardless of how ridiculous his plans are, anticipates Luffy's actions, knows what he has to do to kind of temper things, support his captain in any way he can. There's one hiccup, and that is Whiskey Peak. The fight between him and Luffy at that point, I think, is one of the weaker moments in early One Piece, and one that I don't feel like was motivated very well or explained very well after the fact. But other than that one hiccup, I just love Zoro's complete commitment to the crew and his complete commitment to Luffy in particular. And I know some people don't like how quickly that happens, but I really like it, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the character on this second read through. His story has developed in ways that I wasn't anticipating at the start of the run. So him losing against Mihawk early on in the series really made me think that that was going to be like his ultimate goal, was to fight against Mihawk at the end. He would defeat him. Mihawk is the strongest swordsman, so then Zoro would become the strongest swordsman, and that would be like the culmination of his arc. But with his time skip, he actually goes and trains with Mihawk. And so that was a very unexpected turn, and one that I think not only makes Zoro's story more interesting, but also shows Oda's ability to not create black and white characters. Just because Mihawk was an antagonist early on in the story does not mean that he is evil. Does not mean that he will not help if he wants to do that, right? He's kind of a character who will just do whatever he feels like. I've also enjoyed seeing Zoro's swords upgrade as the story goes on. Again, it's a very linear path that he finds himself on. But it's just interesting, especially hearing some of the backstories of the swords. And Zoro being pulled toward these cursed swords, I think, is a very interesting concept. He has found these swords that are supposed to be very dangerous and are supposed to be cursed, and for some reason Zoro's able to figure them out and he's able to work with them, and I find that concept intriguing. I like hearing from Tashigi about all the different rankings of swords and wondering like how far up the ranking he's going to end up getting. Zoro's conflict with Sanji is very entertaining. I like that dynamic as well. And his inability to go the right way in any situation. Pairing that up with the idea that he wants to support Luffy as much as he can, but also like he has this really terrible quality that hinders him, I think makes for some interesting interactions and makes for some fun moments. Number one for me is going to be Robin. Robin has not strayed from my like top two at any point. I love that she's an archaeologist. I love that she is interested in history. She's always seen reading on a like personal vibes level. It's already a character that I am going to identify with and enjoy seeing. But there's so many other aspects of her character that are so entertaining. She's the first crew member and possibly the only crew member who's like, I'm joining this crew, and not one that Luffy goes and finds and says, you're joining this crew whether you like it or not. A unique concept with her. Her backstory is incredibly tragic. Water 7 Enos Lobby, I think, remains my favorite arc in the entirety of the manga. And when we're talking about characters that have changed and grown over the course of the series, I think Robin is the most obvious. She goes from someone who is suspicious of everybody, who believes that she is going to be a burden to the crew and that it's only a matter of time before they no longer want to deal with her and abandon her, to someone who is smiling, is carefree and easy because she knows that her crew is going to support her. There's a panel in Zoe when I think Cat Viper is talking to her and saying like, hey, you know, a lot of people are going to be coming after you. She just has this panel where she's smiling and saying like, it's not a problem because I've got crewmates who will protect me. Compared to what was seen earlier, that's a complete shift from what she was like at the beginning of the run, at the beginning of the story. If she were to focus on combat and focus on her devil fruit powers, she could be one of the strongest members on the crew. The fact that she now knows a little fishman karate is like pretty intimidating, and I think is something I hope that we explore later. But I think the choice that she's made to not be like a frontline fighter, I think it's something that she doesn't want to pursue, and it's not out of cowardice, but just because it's like that's not her interest. Is a motivation that I can more easily understand and more easily go along with than a character like Usopp, who just doesn't want to fight because they're scared. Robin has possibly the like easiest time skip story. Initially, she's enslaved to build this bridge, but for the most part, she's working with the Revolutionary Army and like learning about Sabo and Dragon. And so again, like this idea that she has all this lore knowledge, she has all this world knowledge, and that's really where she derives a lot of her strength and a lot of her influence, and a lot of where her bounty comes from is from that. She's not high because she is a physical threat. Her bounty is high because she can potentially learn about the Void Century, and that's something the government doesn't want people to learn about. And I think that it's a good reminder that the bounty system is not a power level. It is how much is the world government threatened by you. For all those reasons, Robin is far and away my favorite. I don't think that at this point anything's going to change that. There you have it. That is my ranking for the Straw Hat Pirates. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you are a fan of One Piece, please leave your rankings down in the comments. I hope your reading journey is going well, whether it is manga or fantasy or horror. Please like and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our BookTube community. And until the next one, take care.